Welcome, I'm Sarah Mueller, a reporter with Forbes, and today I'm joined by the University of Iowa professor Tim Hagle, who has joined us before. Tim, thank you so much for joining me.
Good to be with you.
We had quite the shock this weekend with the Iowa poll being released. And for those viewers who don't know, Kamala Harris is in a lead with 47% and Trump at 44%. Now, that is within the margin of error. And before I get your opinion, I do want to address that Emerson College did come out with their poll as well, that has Trump at 53 and Harris at 43%. So just what are your initial reactions? I saw on Twitter that you disagree with this poll.
Yeah, the Iowa poll, and I've sort of looked into it a little bit more. And this morning, I also saw the pollster T.N. Selzer on a podcast talking about her methodology and so forth, and how she was explaining this. Now, the thing about the Iowa poll, it's quite different. It's quite different than the Emerson poll. Obviously, it's quite different even from their own Iowa poll from September. Now, that's 2 months, and 2 months is a long time in politics. But the earlier poll had Trump up. And the thing that just makes me skeptical of the Iowa poll in terms of its accuracy is that it's just so different from every other poll and even from itself. And there really wasn't anything that I would consider significant that happened in the last 2 months. That is, people are saying that, well, didn't this happen and didn't that happen? Yes, it does, but that's kind of causes an erosion sort of effect rather than this big, as we normally call it, like an October surprise or something that's going to significantly change a lot of votes. And so that didn't seem to happen. So this Iowa poll just doesn't seem to reflect what's going on here in Iowa right now. Now, having said that, Selzer does use a different methodology. She talks about it being looking forward as opposed to other pollsters who have a methodology that looks backward. Looking backward meaning like, well, what was the turnout distribution in the prior election? And then they try to model that for the current election. Well, with Selzer, what she does is she basically uses a screen that she calls the likely voter screen, which is that when they're calling people up and asking them if they're going to vote, if they are in fact a likely voter or somebody who's already voted, then they include them in that poll. So what the goal would be is to try to pick up trends and a more current approach to how people are going to vote. And in fact, that has been successful in the past. We usually see Seltzer as sort of the gold standard for polling in Iowa, particularly for the caucuses. But this time, I think maybe this is just an outlier simply because it is so different. And even though Seltzer finds that there's, say, women above 65 seem to be moving to Harris, well, maybe that's true, but it just doesn't seem like it's going to move enough of the votes to make that big of a difference in such a short period of time. And so, especially when you have other polls like the Emerson poll, which was in the field at about the same time as the Iowa poll, which is quite different, as you were saying, about 10 points up for Trump as opposed to the 3 points for Harris in the Iowa poll. It just doesn't seem to be that it's consistent with anything else we're seeing. Now, it doesn't have to be, and it could be that Seltzer did pick up a trend. I'm just skeptical of that.
I totally understand. I was watching an interview with her as well, explaining the process behind it. And it also sounds like she said that there are just more people who can vote and are leaning more Democrat for this election. So I also love that you pulled out that there's this idea that people, women specifically above the age of, I think, 65, are leaning towards the left for this election as well. So just tell our viewers a little bit about what the reputation of the Iowa poll is, because if you look back at the last couple of elections, I think other than kind of a wonky governor's race, there was quite a pretty good standard for the Iowa poll to guess who was going to get Iowa for that election.
Yeah, and again, the Iowa pollsters, T.N. Seltzer, that basically it is considered the gold standard. And that's not surprising. She's from Iowa and understands how to poll in Iowa. And that's particularly true for the caucuses. And that's really sort of where she really shines in the sense that it's hard to poll for the caucuses. And if you have some other pollster coming in from an out of state, doesn't understand the Iowa electorate, doesn't understand the distributions in Iowa, they're going to have a much harder time of finding an accurate or getting accurate poll results, especially as you get close to the caucuses. And of course, with the caucuses, the problem there is getting the turnout right. And again, because it has fairly low turnout compared to even midterm elections. Well, with general elections, other pollsters that come in from other places and poll in Iowa, they have a better shot just because it's more of a general election thing. It's not so idiosyncratic as the Iowa caucuses are. So still, Seltzer in the Iowa poll has been very, very good. But even the best pollster is going to get it wrong sometimes. When we talk about the margin of error and the 95% rate and all of that, that's still 5% that could be wrong. And I think, again, this time it may be something in that category that maybe there is a trend along the lines that Seltzer was finding. But I just, again, can't see that it would be that huge of a change. And part of that is because, yes, there may be more women in the 65 plus category that are voting this time, voting for Harris. But on the other hand, the women, and whether they're Democrats or Republicans in the 65 plus category, that they vote at almost 90% turnout rate anyway. So that's not overly surprising that you would have such a high turnout.
Every vote matters in this race. And something I noted from the Iowa poll was that RFK Jr. is still technically on the ballot for Iowa, and he actually made up 3% of this poll. Now, let's just say, for argument's sake, that this poll is correct. How do you think this could put a damper on the Trump campaign to still technically have RFK Jr. on the ballot in Iowa?
Yeah, and in fact, I saw a short clip today posted on Twitter X where Kennedy was saying, "Hey, look, don't vote for me," and he was explaining why he was supporting Trump and so forth. So, what the Kennedy campaign did is initially, of course, they were fighting hard to get on the ballot in a lot of states, but then when he decided to suspend his candidacy and support Trump, he then had to face the choice of trying to get off the ballot. Now, he didn't try to do that in every state. He only really focused on the states that were swing states where it might make more of a difference, where even a few percentage points for him might swing the state to Harris rather than to Trump. And that's because getting off the ballot requires some time and energy as well. And so for states that he figured were easy Trump wins, or relatively easy Trump wins, there wasn't going to go through the effort and expense of trying to get off the ballot. Well, Iowa happened to be one of those states. If you look at those maps for the last couple of months at least, that have had Iowa solidly in the red in the Trump category. So Kennedy didn't make an effort to get off the ballot here in Iowa. Now, if in fact the Iowa poll is correct and it's much closer than anybody expected, then maybe if a couple percent, 2, maybe even 3% actually voted for Kennedy, didn't get the message that he wanted the people to vote for Trump instead, that they voted for him, that could be enough votes to maybe swing the state to Harris. And that's 6 electoral votes that then all of a sudden goes to Harris rather than Trump. And so all of those folks that are gaming out the 270 that you needed to win that automatically had Iowa in Trump's category going to have to make some major changes in terms of what's going on. Now, having said that, let me also kind of pursue this by saying, well, if that trend exists in Iowa, you might expect that that trend is going to exist in other places as well. Seltzer was basically saying, well, I can't speak to that because she was just polling Iowa and wasn't sure what was going to happen in any other state. And certainly other polls haven't shown a big shift along those lines. But if, in fact, the Seltzer poll, the Iowa poll, was catching some trend, late breaking trend, and if that trend is going to occur in other places as well, I mean, I can't really see why it would be occurring in Iowa and wouldn't occur in other places, especially like Wisconsin and Michigan, other sort of Midwestern states, those two being swing states, that maybe it could be, a huge trend towards Harris. On the other hand, if the Iowa poll is simply an outlier, then again, we'll be focusing on those other swing states and not Iowa.
One of the things I love that you said to me early on, almost 2 years ago, when we started this campaign season, was that Iowa can still be a purple state. It might be red here in recent elections, but if we look at the grand scheme of things, things are always changing. So if this poll is right, will people look at Iowa maybe a little bit different, given that we've had such a red streak in the last couple of elections?
Oh, absolutely. And again, the thing always that it depends on are the no party voters, which is what Iowa calls its independents, of course. And those are the folks that, say that aren't really concerned about the political infighting. They're more concerned with, again, the typical kitchen table issues, jobs, the economy, and healthcare, the economic stuff, basically, and the immigration, probably this time, some school issues as well that are thrown in. So the things that affect them more directly rather than the politics of whatever happens to be going on, the name calling and all of that, and it kind of turns them off. But that's the other thing as to one of the reasons why I think that the Iowa poll may be an outlier this time is because, again, there doesn't seem to be anything significant that would affect those no party voters. That, again, the economy is still not great. Maybe it's a little bit improved. Inflation is down from what it had been, but the prices are still up and so forth. And you even hear the Harris campaign talking about, yes, we need to lower prices and so forth. Well, okay, but the prices are what they are right now. And so that's the question that's facing them as they vote, either have voted already or vote tomorrow, or maybe today, some still early voting going on as well. So, yeah, it's very possible that those independents and no party voters will swing back. And if they do, then again, it sort of lends a little bit more support to my argument that Iowa still, in fact, is this purple state, even though it's on the red side of purple these days. But again, my guess is that it's not going to happen, but we'll see. We'll see.
We have only a few hours until the polls for election day open. Obviously, early voting has been going on. Is there anything that these candidates can do, even on a local level, as we look at some really like heated races for the third district, the first district for Iowa, and all of our House seats right now are red currently, and our Senate seats. So, like you said, very red leaning. But there are some races that people are very close in watching. And so is there anything that these candidates can do in the last couple of hours as voters are coming to the polls to sway those votes?
Yeah, so right now we're in sort of the period where we talk about the candidates making their closing arguments. If you think of it sort of as a long campaign, as a long debate, then it's sort of that matter of, well, what's the last thing you're going to say? What's the thing that you want to take to voters as they go into the polls? Well, again, with early voting, you already have a pretty good chunk of the electorate here in Iowa and elsewhere that have already voted. So, of course, for those voters, it's not going to make a difference. It's the ones that maybe are more marginal. And again, those are also the ones that tend to be in that middle group, not just here in Iowa, but also in other states as well. And so it's partly a matter of making sure that they actually do turn out to vote. And you hear both campaigns emphasizing you got to get out and vote, you need to vote, and so forth. And of course, you prefer that your supporters are the ones that are going to vote, but basically it's going to be true for both sides. And so you want to be in a situation where, you want to seem like you have the momentum, but not so much that your voters would say, oh, well, my candidate's going to win, I'm not going to bother to vote. You don't want that. And you also don't want them to say, oh, my candidate's going to lose, I'm not going to bother to vote. That regardless, you want to make sure you get out and vote, make sure your voice is heard, as you common phrase that's used there. And so then we can see sort of the chips will fall one side or the other, the votes will fall one side or the other, and that everybody has had that chance to vote. You don't want people just sort of sitting back and saying, oh, being complacent or too pessimistic about their candidate's chances. Even if you think your candidate's going to win, even if you think your candidate's going to lose, get out and vote. And that's what the candidates have to say.
To the point of the Iowa poll being so much of possibly an outlier, do you think that that will change the reputation of the poll if it comes that in the next 48 hours we find out that Iowa went with Donald Trump? Would that change how people view or value the poll?
I don't think so. That again, you would hope that any pollster's reputation isn't built on one single poll. Now, sometimes a single poll, if you have somebody that, gets it dead on and maybe they haven't in the past, that you'll take another look at them and say, well, maybe this poll isn't so bad after all. And to some extent, I often think of the Iowa poll that occurred right before the Republican caucuses in 2012, where the Seltzer showed that there was this late surge for Santorum. And in fact, Santorum managed to beat Romney by just a handful of votes, but it was something that late trend that she managed to pick up in her poll. So that was one of the things that kind of put her on the map. And of course, a consistent high quality since then has kept her again in that gold standard category. So one poll isn't going to make a huge difference along those lines. Now, having said that, that even Seltzer has indicated that, you always take a look at your poll, see if it's doing a good job, see if it's off, is there some particular reason it was off? You always will look at the methodology. And of course, she does use a little bit different methodology, but it's been working well so far. But again, we always expect that there's that possibility that even the best pollsters are sometimes going to be off in one way or another. And so the question will be is why? If there's some explanation that's fixable, you'll fix it. If not, you just kind of go forward and hope that next time you'll return to that sort of gold standard result.
Here's the $1 million question for you, Tim. When do you think we're going to get results in with all of this early voting, with some of these swing states? When do you think we'll know that we have a president elect?
Yeah, I asked my two classes about that, and that was one of the questions that they asked right away too. You know, it's really hard to say that it depends on overall, not surprisingly, on sort of how quickly a lot of the other states, not even the swing states, but a lot of the other states, if they come in and if everything lines up the way we'd expect, then we will be down to sort of those last swing states. And unfortunately, a couple of the swing states, the Secretary of States in those states has indicated that, oh, we're not going to have the results until Wednesday or Thursday or something like that. Now, part of the reason I think they're saying that is maybe to sort of damp down expectations. That we get certain places, we get sort of used to the idea that we have instant results. And some states can do that. Florida has been bragging that they're going to be able to have the results in basically 3 hours after the polls close. And of course, those of us old enough to remember the 2000 election say, well, that's good. They had some problems in the past, and so it's good that they fixed them, which they did long before this cycle. But that's the key, is that sometimes when mistakes happen, you have to make sure that you get them fixed for the next time around. And some states have, and some states maybe haven't. And so we'll have to wait and see. Are there going to be any problems with the counting, with the machines being open, any late voting? If maybe something happened where there was a power outage, and so you had to extend the deadline for voting, and that's going to delay things in that state, and how many absentee ballots? Different states treat the absentee ballots, the early ballots differently in terms of some will allow counting before the polls actually close. Some say you can't do that until afterwards. And so that's going to be a bit of a delay. And if the number of absentee ballots is much larger, which it actually isn't compared to 2020, then that can take a long time to count. So hopefully, if it's not a really close race, we might know still by Tuesday night, maybe early Monday, or excuse me, Wednesday morning. But if it's not that close, or if it's a really really tight race and it depends on the votes in one or two states, that's going to throw the electoral college one way or the other. It could be a long time. Hopefully not as long as 2020, or especially not 2000, but it might take a little while, but hopefully not too long.
Before I let you go, I want to quick ask about Harris's appearance on SNL. How much do you think that made an impact? What do you think that did for her campaign?
Well, probably not that much. I think that's at this point that the number of people that are watching Saturday Night Live is probably more in her camp anyway. If it's a matter of, again, keeping people sufficiently energized that they would actually turn out and vote, then that maybe is a good thing. And especially if and I didn't see the whole clip, so she came across as warm or something like that, that would be good, maybe humanize her a little bit. Of course, apparently NBC and Saturday Night Live are in a bit of hot water because it was seen as maybe an inappropriate election contribution. So there's some talk about, well, is Trump going to get an opportunity to have a minute and a half, I think is what the time was, on their network as well. So I don't know if anything is going to come of that, but I'm not sure that it really makes that big of a difference, except another one of those little blips along the way on the campaign trail where something that one campaigner or the other does ends up causing controversy that they didn't expect.
Well, Tim, thank you so much for your time. We'll see how it all shakes out tomorrow.
Exactly. Hopefully tomorrow, not into Wednesday and Thursday.